Tim Drake. Now, when it comes to Tim Drake's character, in recent years, he's been a very controversial figure. And because of this, a lot of people feel like he's a character that either needs to A, die, B, retire, or C, just be forgotten about entirely because there's Damian Wayne. And a lot of Tim Drake superfans like to believe that Damian Wayne is the reason why Tim has been left to the sidelines, the reason why he hasn't had a solo book, he hasn't had a team book with his name on it, he hasn't been written well in general. People like to blame it on Damian, but I believe if they really had a plan for Tim, nothing would have changed that, right? Tim Drake has been left by the wayside. They've been regressing his character ever since, I want to say the New 52, but the New 52, their sin, all they really did was do nothing with the character for the most part. He was just a static character. Rebirth came in and they were like, okay, we got one more left in me. And they actually did a good Tim Drake run in the Detective Comics series by James Tynion, right? They brought back his villains, they brought back his characterization, and they really just brought back his lore, right? That's what made people enjoy it. But ever since then, it's just been downhill from here, brother. Like, they put him on Young Justice only to name him Drake. I hear you like them young. Why did they do that? And then on top of that, when they brought him back, they didn't make him Red Robin. They made him Robin. So he was like of dual custody of the Robin role with Damian Wayne. So like that's already making him invalid. He's like an overlap. He's a nothing character at this point because he is going backwards in time. And to kind of create some buzz, they decided to turn Tim Drake into a headlines character. And what I mean by that is that he's a character that they are throwing things at the wall just to see what will stick and what will get the most headlines. Case in point is when they made him bisexual. Now, I don't really have a problem, yes I do actually, but as a whole, making characters bisexual like a Jonathan Kent, I don't really have a problem with because they didn't really have a prior love interest, and the worst concept can be turned into something great through good execution. Take Batman Beyond. The concept of Batman Beyond was Batman in high school. That sounds like utter garbage. What they did with it is turn it into Batman Beyond, Batman of the future, right? That's the execution the people at the DCAU office did, right? And they made it into something special and a great part of a lot of our childhoods, right? They can do that with these sexuality quote-unquote changes or just shifts, but they decided to go the lazy route. They decided to take a character from the past, that being Bernard, right, and make him his love interest instead of Stephanie Brown. And they didn't even make Bernard interesting. He was just like a one-off who cares character in the Robin run. But they decided to make him his love interest and completely forgo all the Stephanie connection, which really makes me mad. It pushes my buttons because I recently read during Joe Lewis's Robin run, I read an issue, a single one-shot issue, where it was just Tim Drake and Stephanie Brown talking about their perspective of the world and walking around Gotham. That's all the whole issue was about. There was no fighting. It was just those two characters interacting, and that was a beautiful issue. I love it. One of the highlights of the Robin run. But they just completely threw everything aside just for a headline. And this is what's making people believe that Tim Drake as a whole just outlasted his usefulness. His creativity has just flickered out, and that's just not the case. Any good writer, like a Chip Zdarsky, an Al Ewing, a whoever, Philip Kennedy Johnson, any of them, if they wanted, if they were able to maybe, they could go onto the character, write a run, and just bring him back to the forefront. Every character I know who's been neglected or whatever, they are one run or even character arc away from being back to prominence, right? That's all possible, but because he hasn't had anything like that for the past 5-10 years, people have grown sour onto the character, to the point where I see people on Reddit just overall just hating Tim Drake, seeing Damian Wayne as a better character, just because of the way they've been treating him. But I just don't consider that to be the case. What I want to do going forward in this video is to kind of talk about some potential things they can do with the character, and to overall highlight his character aspects, his character traits, and why I believe he's such a unique character to the Robin mythos, the reason why he should be adapted in the DCU going forward, right? They shouldn't just gloss over him just because of Damian Wayne, and to just overall educate people on why Tim Drake was such a special character in the 90s, 2000s, and just the overall post-crisis landscape. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video, the good stuff. So Tim Drake, what makes him special? He is the relatable Robin. Now, I don't want to say this as other YouTubers have said, where it's like he hasn't had a tragic backstory, he hasn't had this, that, and the other, and that's what makes him relatable. Yes, that does kind of count to be a part of it, but it's like all these other things that kind of like mash together to make him the Spider-Man, I guess, of all the Robins, right? He has to deal with the school stuff. Of course, he has his parents. His mom did die, but one thing that people don't realize, which I think is relatable to many people around the world, and the thing that Robin had to go through, is that he was neglected, right, as a child, because his parents were, if you didn't know, they were rich. And because of this, they always had to go flying around, and they just left him home by himself with the maid, right? And one of the reasons why he wanted to be Robin, not just because Batman needs a Robin, and without Robin, Batman can just revert back to his old self and just be an agent of vengeance, especially when he's dealing with the trauma, right? You have to remember, Tim Drake came into Batman's life to kind of push himself to be Robin because of the loss of Jason Todd, right? Batman was acting more vengeful, more arrogant, more just reckless in general, and without care of maybe his own life, right? And Tim Drake kind of brought him back. Yes, it took a lot of arguing on his part, which kind of demonstrates Tim Drake's intelligence, the fact that he was able to argue against Batman, arguably win full-heartedly his case of why he should be Robin, because Batman did not want a Robin, and Tim Drake convinced him. And that was kind of the start of why this kid was so special, right? And he had to go through his own arc, right? We saw him, unlike every other Robin, we saw him train under Bruce, and then we saw him get sent by Bruce to other countries to train. So we saw his training process. We saw him get trained by Lady Shiva. We saw him get the bow staff. One of the great things about Robin, Tim Drake, is that he is the Wally West of Robins. All the things that we know about Robin, we love about him, usually came from Tim Drake. The red and green costume, right? That we see that in Teen Titans 2003. Dick Grayson's wearing it. The red and black costume, that's been worn by Dick Grayson and like Young Justice and Jason Todd and Under the Red Hood. And I guess the bow staff as well, but that's just a superficial level. Tim Drake is the first Robin to get his own solo series, and he managed to get like almost 200 issues off the ground alone on his first solo series. Moon Knight hasn't even gotten that. That's to show you how popular Tim Drake was. Of course, the Batman connection obviously helps, but he is a new character that people have to engage and love, because Batman connection or not, if the character is trash, he wouldn't have had such successful releases, right? People wouldn't have bought into the comics and it wouldn't have lasted that long. Going back to the parents thing, right? He wanted to be Robin because that kind of filled that empty gap in his life, right? The fact that his parents were never really there, he could be Robin, right? That could give him some sense of purpose other than staying at home all day doing nothing. Of course, one of the things that makes him interesting is his friends, right? Going to school, balancing all of that. At one point, he went to boarding school, having to deal with the trouble of switching houses, right? Leaving your friends behind because you're going to a different city, just because your parents said so, right? All of these things, the fact that he had to deal with certain, like, relationship issues, how should I say this? The subtle, not really subtle, the aggressive push into adulthood by a, significant other, let's just say that, let's see if you catch my drift, but like he had to deal with that, and of course shutting that down because of, you know, the good boy that he is, and like even like gun violence and kids getting into gangs and people and bullies accidentally killing the people they're bullying, and like him failing to save lives, and all of these things kind of come together to make one hero so relatable. And yes, he didn't have the tragic backstory, but everything kind of built onto each other. I'm gonna get to it in a bit, but he also was a founder of Young Justice. At that point, when he had to take on a leadership role, that's when you really saw Tim Drake as a detective and as a smart character he is. When he's around Batman, you see that he is smart, but like, of course, you're comparing to Batman, especially so early in his career. Once you see him around other heroes, you realize how smart this kid really is. Post-production Natrix here, just stopping by to say that 90% of you guys are not subscribed. Remember, if you enjoyed this video or any of my previous videos in the past, remember to subscribe. It really helps the channel out a ton. And question of the day, what do you think they should do with Tim Drake going forward to kind of level him out and put him on the right path? Because for the past 5, 6, 7 years, he has been a static character with a lot of moments of regression. So what do you guys think DC should do going forward? Let me know in the comments down below. And yeah, that's all there is from me. See you all later. Peace. What separates Tim from every other Robin was how adamant DC was for giving this man the Spider-Man treatment. And Tim, you had a great run, but what it means to have the Spider-Man treatment is to get constant just trauma and loss in your life, and overall these losses compounded, right? They kept kicking him while he was down, and this eventually helped to shape his character into something even more interesting than what I've mentioned before, right? Become even more engaging and more kind of depressing, honestly, right? He started off as a character that was a very positive kid. He had his own issues, but in the mid 2000s, DC really wanted to see how far they can push Robin, and I guess that's the curse of being a Peter Parker analog. But let's go through some of his, I guess, flaws or just negative character traits that make him into what I believe to be someone that's very relatable. So first up, he has an inferiority complex, and what this really means is that he sees himself as less than his previous, the people who came before him, right? Dick Grayson, he was a trained acrobat, right? Jason Todd, he had the street smarts and the street skills, right? And he found himself having to follow a really tough act because these people already had some built-in baseline, right? He had to start from scratch, and because of this, at times throughout his journey, he feels like he can't really compare to them, right? Even in the beginning, he had a hard time convincing himself that he will ever measure up to them, but time and time again he does, but he has this doubt. And Tim Drake as a character, which is really interesting, is that he's a very analytical character, and because of this, he looks at every single possibility, but he has that very human irrationality, right? Rationality in and of itself gets thrown out the window once something traumatic or something scary happens, to the point where even somebody as smart, as intelligent, as straightforward, direct, analytical minded as Tim Drake can oversee the fact that he is one of the best. He's defeated Lady Shiva. Do you think this little gunshot wound is going to ruin your entire mission? You think you're going to die because of this? No, but he looks at things from a very self-degrading mindset at times. And he always says that he's been living not only in the shadow of Batman, but also the shadow of each and every Robin before him, right? In his dreams, we learn through the Young Justice arc, when Bedlam, one of the first, actually no, it was the first villain. Bedlam is the first villain Young Justice fights, and he has the reality warping abilities, but what he does do, he doesn't really influence this onto Robin, he just kind of puts them, each member of Young Justice, into their own, let's just say genjutsu, right? Their own illusion. And what happens is that he has this face-to-face with Joker, and he has this conversation with Joker kind of telling him, do you feel like inadequate or insignificant? Because, you know, it is kind of a hard standard to live up to the Batman, you know, right? And this is what's going on to his head. No scarecrow fear toxin, no induced illusion by some sort of greater force, right? This is his own head, right? All Bedlam did was put him in that space where he couldn't really get out of it. And this is how Tim Drake feels for most of his career. Even when he graduates and becomes Red Robin, one act or one specific panel that really stood out to me was a case where it was like, let me just read it to you. He's bleeding out and he's like this: "It's a miracle I regained consciousness at all. Batman probably would have had entered some kind of Zen spiritual healing state while plotting out the next 14 moves. I just bled." So you can see how low his self-esteem is, even at that point in his career. And now going to like the losses, right? The compounding losses. It started off with Stephanie Brown in the War Games arc by Black Mask. And then after that, the death of his father, Jack Drake, by Captain Boomerang in Identity Crisis. And after that, in Infinite Crisis, the death of his best friend, Superboy. So he had all of these compounding losses to the point in a situation or encounter with Ra's al Ghul in the Lazarus Pits, he contemplates actually using the Lazarus Pits to resurrect all of these people that he's lost, because he has extreme survival's guilt, right? There's a panel where it's like, what right do I have to live over people that he perceives at that point in time to be better people than him, right? What sort of, how am I better than these people? Why am I living and they're dead? And he has this kind of mental struggle, but overall, through the help of Nightwing, he kind of recenters himself and forgoes resurrecting them. Because when you resurrect people with the Lazarus Pit, it ends up really changing them for the worse, right? And even before that, we see Tim Drake trying to clone Superboy. And of course, Superboy being a clone from Cadmus of Superman and Lex Luthor. But you could see Tim Drake trying to clone him, and then Cassandra, or Cassie Sandsmark, Wonder Girl has to calm him down and say, no, dude, this isn't going to be the Connor that we know. But then Tim like retorts back, he's like, at least you'll be here, right? At least you'll be something. And that's coming from Cassie, that's his girlfriend, and even she knew that. But Tim, you can see he truly lost himself in this period, to the point where he actually, of course, changed his color scheme to be red and black to, of course, mirror Superboy's colors at that time, right? Unironically, being one of the best decisions in his life in terms of how people perceive the Robin mantle in real life, right? That black and red suit is chef's kiss. But going back to the more depressing stuff, the problem with all of these encounters or all of these losses in his life is that he wasn't there in the first place to even help them. He's always found their bodies in the aftermath, after everything was done, or people had to tell him. And there was nothing really he could do. It's not like he was fighting by their side and he tried his best. He wasn't even there in the first place. And when Bart Allen Impulse becomes the Flash, he ends up dying in his solo run by, of course, in my video, my last video, I talked about how inertia tricked the Rogues into killing Impulse. And he doesn't even see the body this time. This time he got the call over the phone and he just falls to the ground. He doesn't even cry. He doesn't even know how to process it. Look at this panel. You can see this is a man who lost everything. So if we look at the trio, the trinity of Young Justice, that was Robin, Superboy, and Impulse, and he's the only one left. So you can see how this really contributes to his survival's guilt, right? And then Batman dies. That's like the final straw, because he always saw Batman as his anchor, the one person out of everybody who he could rely on, and now he's gone. And on top of that, when Dick Grayson became Batman and made Damian Wayne as Robin, he didn't try to do this, but he actually he kicked out Tim, right? Because he felt like he couldn't have Tim work under him because he saw him as an equal. But for Tim, Robin's the only thing he had left, right? Anything that gave his life meaning, and now he has to go out in the world and find something else. He found the Red Robin mantle, and what's really interesting is that the Red Robin mantle was actually an alias of one of his villains, and you see him when he takes up the suit. It is Tim's black suit, his symbiote suit in effect, because this is when he really crashes out, where he really loses who he is, to the point where he has a lot of like suicidal tendencies, to the point where he even contemplates like killing people, right? To the point where he has this mental kind of breakdown of not knowing who he is. At this time, Tim Drake was actually adopted by Bruce Wayne when his parents, his father died. And he ends up calling himself Tim Drake, saying, no, wait, I'm Tim Wayne. Like, wait, what? Who am I? Right? And in this Red Robin state, the great thing about his character arc is that he was eventually able to turn something that was perceived as bad, right? A literal villain mantle, and kind of meld it and forge it into something great at the end of his story. But that took a lot of work, and he didn't really give Red Robin like the best name at the beginning either way. But what does happen is that through the entirety of the Red Robin run, his entire goal is to find Batman, because he believes Batman is not dead, right? Superman came back, Flash came back, why can't Batman? And everybody thinks he's crazy. He starts to believe he's crazy, but at the end it all pays off, because Bruce is actually alive, and it leads to one of the most satisfying hugs in all of comics. It's so wholesome. But yeah, I guess if I want to like go more into like the suicidal aspect of Tim Drake, this even happened before he took on the Red Robin mantle and he had his red and black suit, so you know, not too long before this. But I think of him as not an active person who wants to take his own life, but he sees it as a passive role. You know how some people, or most heroes in general, have this selflessness to them, where it's like they will risk their life and put their lives on the line to save people. Tim will do that on purpose, right? He will do anything that he can to put himself in these situations. Selfless heroes don't want to be in these situations, but they do it because they have to. Tim will like take on suicide missions just knowing the fact that it is that, right? And knowing that even though he might, or he's most likely to die, my purpose is that I've actually helped people, right? He has this unfearing nature towards death, which I know a lot of people have, but he kind of welcomes it in a way that other heroes really don't. Like, there's this one comic where the Batman of tomorrow, his future self, gets shown to him, right? They meet each other in this future version of Tim where he becomes Batman. He's a gun-toting killer who kills his villains, and he has this ideological debate of like, what's better, what causes real change, right? And instead of like going through all of his options, going through his analytical brain and thinking, okay, let me talk him down, let me appeal to his humanity, let me, I don't know, show him a better way. He's like, you know what, okay, I'm gonna make a real change. He kicks the gun out of his hand and puts it towards his own head. Okay, this is how we make a change, right? Instead of trying to talk him down, he's like, I would rather kill myself so that I don't become a killer myself than talk him down. So you could see how he was really pushing himself into these situations to do these things, right? And what makes everything so satisfying is the full loop. The fact that he wasn't crazy, the fact that Bruce was actually still alive, the fact that he played a part, a great part in fact, to him coming back. And that act in and of itself kind of brought Tim back from the brink, right? We see the loss that one man could experience and eventually basically his redemption of himself, the self-battle that he fought. He won it. He didn't let it consume him. So that's what Tim Drake really is, what he boils down to at the end of the day, and it's really sad to see DC basically forego all of his potential. What I would like to see from DC is there's this thing in the community where we have certain pitches, right? That's how desperate we are. And one pitch that I saw that was really interesting was where they changed the Red Robin name, right? Tim won't be going by Red Robin in the future. What he will go by is Cardinal, which is a sick name and of course keeps the bird theme. But it would also be cool, and what people have pitched is that he would be a private detective taking on different cases. And how I picture it is seeing Tim not only take cases in Gotham, but maybe have like a tour de force of like the entire DC universe. And maybe he goes to Central City and has to deal with some of the rogue stuff. Or maybe he goes to Superman and deals with like alien crimes or something like that. That's the cool thing. Other people say that he could be like the Grey Ghost, right? Of course, being a reference to Batman's childhood hero in the animated series, but him being a globe-trotting adventurer type of hero that deals with these cases, that could be cool as well. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. This is a very, very heated topic because you could really do so much with Tim Drake. There's so much potential that you could tap with him, but DC is just throwing him by the wayside. But yeah, what do you guys think? Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on post notifications so you know when a new video goes live. And yeah, see you all later. Take care.